Um, Welcome everybody. We are starting Siman Sadi Het, which starts off about bones, but it also gets into other topics like the general concept of Hanan, which will be really important. And some interesting opinions of the Ramah. Well, can anybody foreshadow what's some of the interesting, unusual opinions of the Ramah that in the Siman? Actually, some in the first part and some in the second part. Well, the first in the first part oh, Lexi, you have a hand raised.
Well, yeah, just in our bit that we're gonna see, there seem to be contradictions between, or at least at first glance, contradictions between his stance on bones and what they can or cannot join to do, and his stance on what happens for like kalim, whether Hanan can apply to kalim slash non-flavored things.
Ah, right. Kaylee, right. Definitely Kaylee. That's right. This is a major issue. It's going to be, or a major point, chidush, or and a point that, I would say, you have to associate with the Ramah in particular. One is the question of Hanan in Kaylee, and another one is in. I don't want to say what his opinion is yet, but the other one is something you didn't mention. Um, Anybody else have an idea?
I,
Well, Joel?
I mean, Easter Davuk also seems to be.
Yes, exactly. Isser Davuk. That's another thing. It's kind of like parenthetically comes up. There's like a few side points that come up, but it's worth noting to yourselves that these are like two topics which are particularly like if you think about Isser Davuk, you should immediately think about the Ramah. The Ramah is like that's his thing. And also Hanan. Okay, but that's my brief introduction. Um, let's start. I want to read the first two sifim in the tour. Maybe Eitan, you want to read for us the first two sifim in the tour?
Sure. חתיכת נבלה שיש בה בשר ועצמות שנפלה לקדרה של התר, יש אומרים שעצמות האיסור מצטרפים עם בשר האיסור, להצריך 60 כנגדו, ועצמות ההתר מצטרפים עם בשר ההתר, גם כן לבטל האיסור. So if you have a piece of meat that's of treif meat that has both meat and bones on it that falls into a heter pot, there are those who say that the bones of the isur are added together with the meat itself in order to need 60 against both the bones and the meat to make it batel, of 60 of heter to make it batel. And that the bones of the heter add together with the meat of the heter also in order to cancel out the isur.
And this is if we have to label this opinion. First of all, let's call it opinion one. It's the first opinion. And secondly, we'll call it almost like the common sense opinion. Like, yeah, this is from a treifa animal. This is from a kosher animal. So everything from the treifa animal goes in one is one side of the war of the bittul argument, and everything in the kosher animal is the other side. Okay, so that's the first opinion. Now go on, Rabbeinu Shimshon.
ורבנו שמשון כתב שאפילו עצמות האיסור מצטרפים עם ההתר לבטל האיסור, וכן היא מסקנת אדוני אבי הראש ז"ל. So Rabbeinu Shimshon wrote that even the bones of the isur, they add together with the heter in order to cancel out the isur. So it's everything counts against the isur that's not the isur meat, meaning the isur
Right.
bones even counts as heter.
Exactly. So we'll call this opinion number two. This also makes sense, right? You could say if you consider I'm just on a very quick level, if you consider the bones not usser, because maybe they're not edible, they're not food, so maybe something like that. But yet they do count on the heter side. They're not neutral. They do count on the heter side because well, we'll see. The Bach says because, well, anyone remember what does the Bach say, or why would they count towards the heter? Or you don't have to say the Bach. Just what's your svara? Why would they count towards the heter? Yeah, Eitan. Or no, let's ask somebody else. Ruvain.
Because they don't have their own time.
Yeah, but they don't have their own. They don't have their own time. But what do they have that allows you to let them be heter? You have to have something. That just says why they're not why they don't cause
Well,
isser.
they,
But
they,
what?
they can absorb, but they don't impart their own flavor.
Right, they can absorb. They're still something that absorbs flavor. They're not like a inert matter. They're absorbent. So they count towards the heter. Okay, go on, Eta.
לפיכך, הבא לבטל איסור שנפל לקדרה, יצרף כל מה שבקדרה בין רוטב ובשר וקיפה, ועצמות, ואפילו העצמות של האיסור, ואם יש בין הכל 60 מותר. אבל המוח שבעצמות האיסור מצרף עם האיסור לאסור.
Okay, so first, right. So he kind of throws in there in the last bit like a kind of impossible thing. Okay, now we got to start figuring out how much marrow is in the bones, which is going to be difficult. But he's basically positing like the Rosh. He's saying everything counts. By the way, like, what about minba minno, minba eno minno? Does he care about that? In other words, if we ask the question, when you have a pot of isser falling in, and you have all kinds of stuff there, some of which is bone, some of which is kifa, some of which is other meat, some of which is minba minno, some of which is not minba minno. Do you count everything, or do you ignore the minnow? Do you ignore the eno minnow, or do you count everything together? So it sounds like he's saying you count everything together. Not saying you ignore anything, even if it's minnow or not minnow. Everything counts. Is there 60? And you count also the bones of the Isser, because he's paskening kind of like the Rosh, right? And Rabbeinu Shimshon. With this one proviso with them all. And now he's going to give another proviso. Read the next part.
וגוף הקדרה אינה מצטרפת לא עם ההתר ולא עם האיסור. So the pot itself doesn't count in either direction for the heter or isur. You just count what's inside, basically.
Right. And this was, of course, a Gemara that we learned in the introduction. We learned about two different lashonot of what exactly it means, but what exactly means the pot doesn't count. Could it be the actual metal of the pot, or the flavor absorbed in the pot? But he just says the pot doesn't count. But it's neutral. It's neutral. Okay. Go on.
בא מדברים אמורים, בחתיכת נבלה שנפלה לקדרה כשהיא חיה. אבל אם נתבשלה תחילה ואחר כך נפלה לקדרת התר, עצמות שבה מצטרפים עם האיסור, לפי שבלעו מבשר נבלה כשנתבשלה לבדה. So this is talking about specifically a case when the piece of meat that falls into the pot is raw. But if it's already been cooked beforehand and then falls into the pot of heter, then the bones that are in the isur piece of meat add together with the isur because they've absorbed from the isur meat when it was cooked alone outside of the heter.
Right. So why? Okay. So what happens when you cook it ahead of time? What is the mechanism? What is this mechanism? What's happening here? Is this Hanan? In other words, Chaticha Nase Nevela. Are we saying that the bones have become Nevela? And therefore, by the way, this is like Isser Davuk also, if you notice, if you think about it. Isser Davuk means the classic case of Isser Davuk. And anyone know the classic case of Isser Davuk? Joel knows it, but he's learned this with me like 3 times, for 3 different years, maybe 4 years. So the classic case is Joel. So you tell us, Joel.
It's chalev still attached to a piece of meat, right?
Right.
And they cook within other stuff, but the chalev infects that piece of meat first before it infects anything else. So.
Right. So here it's like the classic case is where the chalev and the meat are cooked even in a pot with other meat, and even so, we would say that the chalev parts flavor first to the piece that it's attached to, and then to the rest of the pot. So the piece that it's attached to becomes usher even more so, becomes chana. Here, it's even here we didn't say that because when the bones were cooked together raw, we didn't say isur davar. But now it's kind of like isur davar. But now it's because it's cooked separately ahead of time. So the bones become usher because they absorb, like you said. So it sounds like on the surface that it's chanan. Does anybody think it's not chanan? Lexi, Joel, think it's not chanan? Anybody else? Well, that's already, if Lexi and Joel said that, then Isaac also says, okay. So look, well, let's just finish the tour, and then we'll look at the Bach immediately, just to understand this case. It's important to understand this case.
לפיכך, כשחזרה ונפלה לקדרה, צריך לשער גם בעצמות, ולא סגה בשישים כנגד הבשר, דשמא נטמאת בשר הנבלה בבישולו ונכנס בעצמות. Therefore, if it comes back and falls into the kedera again after it's been cooked, you need to measure also the bones, and 60 isn't enough to measure against just the meat. Because maybe the meat of the nevela has sort of shrunk down as it's been cooking, and that shrinking sort of has entered into the bones.
Okay, wait. So you're already explaining this correctly. What's the incorrect explanation? It's just, I mean, that's the correct. In other words, the incorrect explanation is to think that this is chanan, that everything became aser, and the bones became aser, and the meat became aser. So now you have to measure against everything, even though the bones really, really were heter. But now they became iser, like chanan kind of. And the problem with that, saying that, is that we know from other places that the Tur holds no chanan in Shari Surim. So you can't say chanan here. So Eitan quite rightly said it's not the mechanism of chanan. And the Bach is going to, so it's, what is it, the mechanism? Is that it's absorbed in. Where did we see that in the Gemara? Did anybody remember that from the Gemara? Or actually, more specifically, I think it was Rashi. Learned to be.
This was in the Gita Nasha, right?
Explain. Tell me more. Maybe
I don't have the Gemara right in front of me, so I couldn't quote it for you. But like how much is absorbed, and then you have to peel off a klipa or something like that.
No. It's not from that. No, it's not from that case. No, it's from the case of the walls of the pot. Really, this whole thing we're discussing is the walls of the pot. Those two lishnas that we learned in the Gemara. There was two lishnas. One that you measure. You get to use the pot walls. You do get to use the pot, and some say no, you can't use the pot. And then there's this, and Rashi explains what does it mean to use the pot. And Rashi says that if you boiled it down, some of the flavor went into the pot, so you could use that flavor that was stored up in the pot. So look at the Bach here, and maybe I'll ask Isaac. You're going to read the Bach here. It's the short bet, Bach bet.
Okay. ומה שכתוב, אבל אם נתבשלה תחילה וכולי, עד כשנתבשלה לבדה.
Wait, so slow down.
Okay.
What does that mean?
So we're looking at
He's quoting the Tur.
Yeah, they're quoting the Tur. Looking at the case where if the meat had already been cooked, then we consider the bone to be iser. And then, yeah, so that's the whole case because it'll have. Yeah.
Until where it says.
But that's the end of that same case.
Yeah. If it was cooked separately, then all bets are off. It's a whole different case.
Right. Okay. So,
okay, go on.
Ika lemedak de lama sheina halashon de hayalo lomar keshenit bashla techila v'lesh.
Period. All right.
Sorry. Okay. So we have reason to sort of dig in and wonder why the language is different here, because he could have said when it was
should have said even
should have said
Yalo Lomar. He should have said
when it was cooked first.
First, period. What's the difference? He says it shouldn't have said when it was cooked levad. It shouldn't have said when it was cooked by itself, it should have said when it's cooked first. What's his question? Anybody?
Well, I mean, perhaps the question here is that why do we care if it's specifically if it's cooked previously to it being added to the pot where it's going to be, we're going to be trying to figure out if there's 60 and what do we count, blah, blah, blah. Does it matter what it was cooked with? If it was cooked with, couldn't have been cooked with something else initially, right?
Right, exactly.
Because in
He's
theory,
saying
you have options, right? Like possibly it's like
you shouldn't have said it was cooked by
if it is cooked
itself.
with something else, and when you add it to another pot, it still has to be mavatel again, because every time you put it in a different pot, it needs to be mavatel. So like, why are they saying it's cooked by itself? I mean, I think my answer to that would be the Torah is trying to emphasize that it's not picking up its iserness of the bones from this cooking, from some other thing. It's happening from the meat it's attached to.
That's true. But it would have been enough for him to just say it was cooked beforehand. That was the point. It was cooked beforehand and became usser. Doesn't matter whether it was levad or not levad. Why did he say levad? Why did he say it was all alone in the pot when it was cooked? What if an implication that the din might be different if it was cooked with many other pieces? So that's exactly what the doc is going to get into. So keep reading.
Okay, where was I? ויש לשב דבר להורות דהיכה דלה ראה האיסור כשהיא חיה, הטעם הוא דלה סגי בשישים כנגד הבשר, דשמה נתמעט בשר וכולי. Okay, so we could answer that this
No, not we could. And this is the answer.
All right, this is the answer. So the answer is that it comes to teach us that here, where we didn't see the Isser when it was still raw.
No, wait, hecha is when or where. The hecha de lorea, that in a case where he didn't see the Isser, go ahead.
Didn't see it when it was raw.
Right.
That's the case where 60 versus the meat is not considered enough to make it mavatel. Because what if the meat had cooked down?
Mm-hmm.
So in other words, sorry?
Yeah, keep reading.
Okay. אבל אם ראה האיסור כשהיא חיה, אז ודאי סגי בשישים כנגד הבשר שראה בעוד שהייתה החתיכה חיה. ואין כל זה אלא כשנתבשלה לבדה.
Wait. All right, stop there. Wait.
Okay. All right. But if you saw the Isser when it was still raw, then obviously 60 against the meat that you saw when it was still raw. Like, in other words, you know how much there was when it was still raw, and you need 60 against that much. That's enough to make it mavatel.
Right. In other words, like this: if you had a kilo of meat raw and a kilo of bones, and now it cooked by itself. Let's say it cooked by itself. And now you have a half a kilo of meat and a kilo of bones. Okay, you got that? You started off with a kilo of bones and a kilo of meat. And now you cooked it down, the meat got shriveled down, and it's only a half a kilo of meat. And the bones still, let's say, is a kilo. And now it falls into a pot. And you saw the amount, you knew it was a kilo beforehand. So how much do you need to mevatel? How much needs to be in the pot in order to mevatel that piece?
So you need 60 kilos versus the meat. Right? Because we just said, sorry, did you say originally 2 kilos?
Don't just give me the final answer. It was a half a kilo it was a kilo of meat and a kilo of bones, and now it's a half a kilo of meat and a kilo of bones. And how much has to be in the pot
So you need 60 versus the meat, and then hang on just a second, let me think.
Well, let's just stick with that opinion. You said 60. You're saying you need 60. But don't say versus the meat. I'm asking versus the whole thing. The whole thing fell in. How much needs to be in the pot to matter?
Okay, that's why I'm saying give me a second so I can do the math.
Okay.
And you keep on trying to stop me from doing the math. Okay.
I don't want you to think.
You need 60 versus the meat, and you need 60 versus the bones. So you need 120 altogether, right? Because you originally had 2 kilos of the meat plus bones, right? Because in
No,
this,
I'm taking a survey. I'm taking a survey. I just want to hear an opinion.
oh, sorry.
So you say 120 now.
Yeah, because you need versus the bones and the meats.
Okay.
Originally was.
Any other opinions? Jacob, what do you say?
I mean, I don't know if that's 120. I don't know if the bone is like, if we're considering that the same size as the meat. So it might just be 60 against the bones and the meat together.
Again, I just want to know how many kilos of broth there has to be. It's a kilo of meat and it reduced to a half a kilo, and a kilo of bones. How much has to be in the pot to mavatel it? That's all I'm asking. I just want a number of kilos in the pot. I don't want to against this and against that. I just want to know the number total.
I guess if we see half a kilo of meat and 1 kilo of bone, then I would say 90 kilos.
90 kilos. Okay. Eitan, what do you say?
I think 60.
Okay. Why do you say 60?
Because when it was raw, there was 1 kilo of meat, and the bones, when it's raw, you're not counting against the thing, against the heter. And so once, if it's been cooked levada, then you're still like, it's as if the half kilo of meat entered into the bones. So there's still a full kilo of meat, half kilo of meat, and the other half enters into the bones. So you're just counting it all against the 1 kilo of the original meat when it was cooked levada.
Okay. Josie, which opinion do you agree with of the three that we've heard?
I'm still struggling with volume versus mass here because
Well, okay.
We're not distinguishing
I'm using a mass
because this isn't
measurement.
done by physicists. We're not physicists.
I'm using a mass measurement
no,
to
if it's
mean a volume
I,
measurement.
if it's all volume, then assuming that it's been reduced down, I'm gonna hold with Eitan and say 60.
Right. But when I say I'm using a mass measurement, I'm doing that for convenience sake because I don't have. I mean, I could use a liter of meat, but it kind of sounds weird. But yeah. So you go with Eitan. Okay. Caleb, how do you go?
I'm going with Eitan.
Okay. People are starting to join the majority here. Max, what do you say?
It feels a little unfair, but I'll go with Shishin with Eitan.
Okay, yeah. So everyone sort of went that way. So let's explain. That's the right answer. Why is what? And that's what the Bach is saying. What is the point? You see, if you would say 90 or 120, then you would be saying Hanan. You'd be saying that the original Isser got bigger. It was 1 kilo, and now there's more than 1 kilo. And what the Bach is saying is there's no Hanan going on here. It's just you need to go against the original amount. Now, why did the tours say that you have to go against the meat and the bones in that case? Why did he sort of misled us? Because he says you have to go against the meat and the bones. So
no.
So why did he say that? Because he's thinking about a different type of case. So he's thinking about a case where you don't know the amount that it was in the beginning. See, this is where you do know the amount. You knew it was a kilo. But what if you don't know it was a kilo or a liter of meat, but it was unknown to you? So then, if it's unknown to you, then you have to go by the worst case scenario. Maybe it was gigantic, but it can't be more than what's in front of you, which is a half and 1, which would mean it would be 1.5 kilos or liters of volume, and you'd need to have in the pot there for 90 liters. But that's only where you don't know. So Joel, you want to say something?
This is exactly analogous to last week with the kaf yashan versus kaf hadash, right? It's if I know how much Isser I use with that spoon, then I can measure, and it's a new spoon. I can measure against how much Isur, it was balua in it. And if I don't know that, if I didn't see it beforehand, then I have to assume the whole kaf, at least all the kaf that I put in, exuded Isur in
Right.
the same way.
Right.
So,
Right. It's the same. And it's not to do necessarily with, well, let's see over there. Was it Hanan there? How did we
no,
understand
because
that?
we also said that Kalim,
Not-
well,
it's
there was
not
one
Hanan.
argument that Kli Cheres is Hanan, but forget Kli Cheres for the moment. And
Right. Okay. So right, it's the same kind of din. So now, Isaac, I stopped you in the middle there.
Okay.
Sorry.
Wait, Rabbi Landis wants to say something, I think.
Yeah, well, let's see, if I can speak. I always like to talk. We depend upon klalim when we don't know. And if we know a lot, then there's a reality factor. So if you know how much meat there really was going in, you can't deny the reality. That's just the case. But if you don't know, then we have klalim. Nothing more than that.
Yeah. In other words, if it would be Hanan, just repeat again. If it would be Hanan, then we could expand the volume of the Isser. But since there's no Hanan going on here, there's no expansion of the Isser. And if we know the Isser, then fine. And if we don't know the Isser, we assume the worst case scenario. We have to measure against all the meat and all the bones. All right, but now that was now it goes on. The ain calls that. So Isaac.
All right. ואין כל זה אלא כשנתבשלה לבדה, אבל אם נתבשלה תחילה עם שאר חתיכות איסור, אז אפילו ראהו לאיסור כשהיא חיה, לה סגי בשישים כנגד הבשר, דשמה משאר חתיכות איסור נתמעט בשר הנבלה, ונכנס בעצמות של חתיכה זו. Okay. So that's all of this that we just discussed, where we're doing this discounting of the bones. This is only a case where we cook the meat and the attached bones by themselves. But if you cooked it with other pieces of Isur, even if you saw the Isur that's going to end up in the second pot when it was raw, 60 against that meat is not enough. Because what if the other pieces of Isur cooked down and then that Isur went into the bones of the piece that we're focusing on?
Right. So back to my case. If you had a liter of meat and a liter of bones, and you cooked it with other treif bones and other treif meat, and now the meat is only a half a kilo, and the bones are still a kilo, how much do you need to mevatel?
Sorry, can you repeat those numbers one more time?
I mean, in the same case, it was a kilo and a kilo, and the meat became now a half a kilo, and the bones stayed the same size, but you cooked it with other treif meat.
Well, the answer is that we need more than 60, but it doesn't tell us how much.
Well, it does. No, that's exactly what the Torah tells us. The Torah tells us. And that's exactly the case that Torah tells us, kind of.
Okay.
So how much would you need how many kilos would you need if you had 1 kilo of bones and a half a kilo of meat? Even though you knew it was originally a full kilo of meat, we said before, if it was with levad, you'd need 60. But if it's not levad, then how much would you need?
Well, so presumably then, so we need 60 versus the bones, because the bones are going to add to the Isur in this case.
Right.
Not 100% sure on is if we're going to say that the half kilo of meat is reckoned as still being its original 1 kilo, or if it's now reckoned as half a kilo because that's what's in front of us. So we do end up with 90 or do we end up with 120?
So no, so we're going to end up with 90. You can't have more than what you have in front of you. You have in front of you 1.5 kilos, so that's the maximum. And the point is that it's in this case that it's the half a kilo of meat that disappeared. You can't say it sorry, you before we were saying, and at most a kilo of meat absorbed a half a kilo of flavor because that's all that disappeared from the original meat. But now more could have come in from other pieces, so the full volume of the bones could be absorbed, could have the full volume of the bone could have Isser in it. Even though, so you have more, but not because of Hanan, but because the bones absorbed from some other meat. So now if you go back and read the tour, let me read the tour now. B'mei devar mamurim b'chaticha nevela shenafla lekedera kishehi chaya. Then you only count the meat. Aval im nitbashla techila v'achar kach nafla lekedera taheter atzamot sheba mitzarfim ima iser lefi shebalu mebasar hanevela kishenitbashla levada. So wait a second. When he says atzamot mitzarfot ima iser lefi shehi bala mebasar hanevela kishenitbashla levada, what he means is not the full volume of the bones, but only that part of the bones that could possibly have Isser in it, which is the amount that was mitma'et, that went down of the from the original Isser meat. In other words, if the Isser meat was a kilo originally, and now it's 0.999 kilos, then when he's saying count the bones, he doesn't mean count the full volume of the bones. He just means count the bones to whatever extent the meat went down, which is a tiny bit in my case, if it's 0.999, be 0.001. He doesn't mean count all the bones. He just means count some of the bones. That's the way the Bach is reading it. And that's why he says levado. Because if it wouldn't be levado, then you would count the full volume of the bones. That's the way the Bach is reading it. And I think it's I don't know if that's what it's hard to say that's, I mean, you have to explain why the Torah said levado and not techila. Whether or not it's what the Torah meant, it certainly seems right. It certainly seems that should be the halacha.
Sorry, so are you saying that instead the math for the case of the kilo and kilo that you put forward, according to the box reading of the Torah, should not be we have half a kilo of meat and 1 kilo of bones, that therefore 90. Instead, it should be we had 1 kilo of meat, it went down 1/2, therefore we have 1 kilo plus 1/2 that we assume has gone into the bones.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Except I know what Lex is going to say. Yes, exactly. But Lex is going to say now, but wait a minute, Rabbi Nachum, you're forgetting, because he's talking about a case where you don't know the volume. And when you don't know the volume originally, then you do count all the bones. And that's what when he says you count the bones, he actually does mean you count all the bones, because it's a case where you didn't know the original value.
But yeah, if you're talking about a case where you saw originally that you had 1 kilo of meat, how does it make any sense to say you're counting a full kilo of meat after it's reduced down to half, plus the half that's disappeared that you now assume is in the bones? Because then by that rubric, you're saying that you're actually measuring 1.5 times that original meat.
No, not at all.
Oh, in that scenario, that's where you do 60, where you had 60 kilos.
That's where you do 60. That's exactly right. Not at all.
Okay.
You just count the half. The only time you would count the full volume of the meat and bones would be where you don't know the original value of the meat. If you're in ignorance, then for all you know, the original piece was 100 kilos and it reduced now to 0.5 kilo. So all that 99 kilos went into the bones, but it still can't be more than the volume of the bones. So you'll count the full volume of the bones and the full volume of the meat. That's where you don't know, because you don't know what the size was. So that's what the Torah really means. But maybe Lexi is telling me that I did not read her mind.
No, I was actually going to talk about the levada, which I think that, or levado, which I do think that like one potential alternative answer is just that it's like theoretically he could have said this in different words, but that he's emphasizing that it was initially cooked in a scenario where it was not bottled, right? Essentially that like you're saying, oh, it was cooked by itself, i.e. definitionally a case where there was no.
I disagree. Wait, let me interrupt you. I disagree. Even if it was in a case where it was not batel, where it was batel, it still remains aser. That piece.
The thing
I mean, even in a case, even if it would have been batel, when we retrieve it and we know it's a hatichat iser, then it doesn't matter that it was batel before. I mean, unless you're telling me that if it was actually batel and we don't know which piece it is and it could be it, then it's a totally different case. Then it's not a case of iser falling in.
I mean, if it's the case where we
it's
know
heter falling in.
Then, I mean, a part of it is also probably that it's just a less plausible scenario. Again, you could argue why does he need to say levado if it's the more plausible case anyway, but that like the scenario where it was in a pot, it was bottled, but then a piece, and we know that it is this piece, comes out of this pot, falls into a different heter pot. Obviously, we get into lots of these edge cases throughout the Gemara and throughout our Simanim, but like it is arguably a far less like likely and clear-cut scenario. And so I think it's possible that Levado, I think the box, as you said, I think that like the box halacha makes sense regardless of whether it was what like the Torah was mitkaven, but I think it is also possible that was just sort of the most straightforward scenario the Torah could envision.
I don't know. I find that I don't know. I don't think your answer is better than the box. I think it's box is better, but it's possible. I mean, it's possible. I think that if it would be a case of it mixed with other pieces and then fell, I don't think that all that is what the Torah was thinking, because then it would be a case of like fake sfeika, and you say it's not safek, but then why is it pata? I don't think that makes sense. I don't want to get into it really more, but I don't think what you're saying could be what the Torah meant. But in any case, let's just agree that the halacha, it seems to make sense, that if you do know, you go by what you know. And if you don't know, then all the atzamot are aser. And because you don't know how much it originally was. Okay, let me go on further with the Isaac finished. Wait, who was reading the tour? Eitan, read a little bit more of the tour.
Starting at Daled, Misharim.
No, lefichach. I think that, maybe I didn't. Maybe you read it. Let me read it again. Lefichach,
Okay.
where it after it says levada.
לפיכך, כשחזרה ונפלה לקדרה, צריך לשער גם בעצמות, ולא סגה בשישים כנגד הבשר, תשמא נטמאת בשר הנבלה בבישולו ונכנס בעצמות. So therefore, when it goes back and falls back into the kederet of heter, you need to measure also the bones of the iser that fell in, and it's not enough just to have 60 against the basar that fell in, because maybe the basar the basar of the nevela has reduced when it was cooked and entered into the bones of the nevela.
Right. So, and again, the atzamot, you'll potentially count part of the atzamot or all of the atzamot, depending on whether you knew the original size at the beginning or not. Says the Bach. Okay, let's go back to the beginning and look to the Beit Yosef, because I want to see the Beit Yosef is going to bring kind of the Rishonim that talk about these different opinions. Remember, we saw the different opinions about whether you count the atzamot at all. How do you count them? Which way do you count them? So, Max, you didn't read. Maybe you can read the Beit Yosef here.
Okay.
Aleph. We're in Aleph. Chaticha nevela sheyesh ba basar b'atzamot shenafla lekedera shel heter. Yesh omrim she'atzamot ha'isr mitztarfim im basar ha'isr letzrich shishim kenegdo. So that's the first opinion.
Yeah.
That you need that the atzamot ha'isr. Yesh omrim she'atzamot ha'isr mitztarfim im basar ha'isr. Everything in the Isser camp, versus everything in the Heter camp.
They each go their own direction.
Right.
Hachi mashma perkira nashe gabe hadamaisi le shiurei ha'isurim yizro b'sheila min ha'ayil. Dilamanda amar de shiurei ha'isurim b'shishim atzamos ha'isur means starfin le'isur v'atzamos ha'heter means starfin le'heter. So this is the Torah gets this from the Gemara in Gita Nasha about deriving shishim from zro b'sheila. That everything just goes in its own within its own camp.
So wait a second, but because what is the opinion in the Gemara? What does the Gemara say? If you say shishim, remember there was shishim. This is the Gemara that we learned. There was shishim and there was 100. The 100 opinions said it's the basar against the atzamot and the basar. It's the basar of the leg against the basar of the meat, or a basar of the cow, or the meat of the cow. I mean,
everything else.
Or maybe the bones and the meat of the cow, but it's just the meat. And the other one said, what the 60 said, what did the 60 say? What was his opinion?
It's with the bones.
It's the meat and the bones against the rest of the cow. So it's the meat and the bones. That's one camp. That's the bones. That's the bones. That's our whole question. Amazing proof. Amazing proof that the bones of the Isser count on the side of the Isser, because after all, we learned 60 from the whole opinion that says 60 is the opinion that says that the bones and the meat go against the rest of the bones and the meat of the other cow. So that's this camp versus that camp. So here you go. You can't have a better proof than that. Amazing proof, right? Everybody agrees? Everyone's excited about that proof? Makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, very.
Okay, now, Josie, can you read the Kasav Haran?
So, okay. The Katav Haran, Birshami, Perak Kama Orla, in Sof Halacha Gimel. Mashma da'at klipe isur me'alim et ha'isur.
Period.
Okay.
Explain.
So the Ran is going to quote this this Yerushalmi that says that even the outer shells of the even like the shells or the outer layer of the Isur, I'm not quite sure how to say, Ma'alim at the Isur, like enhance the Isur, or
no, we've had this word before, Ma'alin. You've seen it, I think, last week or the week before.
It count as Isur, right?
No, it means count against Isur. This is like the Mishnaic way of saying Mevatel. It counts. It's the way. It means Ma'alin. It goes into the things that we count in order to create bittul, the things that are going against the Isser. So what is the Yerushalmi saying? Tell me in your own words.
So the Yerushalmi is saying that the whatever is sort of on the outside of our Isur counts, is part of the, can be counted with the 60 that we're going to be Mavatel.
Right, and he's talking about, let's say, nuts that are orla or something, and you need to mevatel, walnuts, let's say, and can you count the hard shell of the walnut? Let's say if one orla walnut fell into a whole lot of other walnuts, then can you count the hard shell of the walnut as things to mevatel? Let's say they're ground up, it's broken, not whole, and let's say that the shell of the orla one can also count to create the 60 to mevat, or the actually 200 for orla to mevatel the orla. That's what the Mishnah over there in orla is talking about.
Fills out the volume.
Right, it fills up the volume. So
that's how it translates.
Okay.
So what's the Ran saying? What is the Ran doing to our Gemara about Zorah B'Sheila? What is he showing?
It's sort of this idea that we can count the non-important parts of whatever it is we are.
Does this agree with our Gemara or not agree with our Gemara?
It seems to go against the Gemara, I would say.
Yeah, it goes against our Gemara.
It doesn't matter. And here it's saying, but some of the forbidden stuff is actually permissible.
So in other words, in our Gemara, we have a great proof that the bones, the bones are keilu. What are the bones being compared to here by the Ran? To the klipa. Just in our Gemara, the bones count towards the Yisr, and this Mishnah Orla seems to be saying, no, the bone, or Mishnah, or not Mishnah, Gemara and Orla is saying the bones, or in this case the klipa, actually goes on the other side. So we have a machloket bavli yushalmi. Let us put it in that language. It's a machloket bavli yushalmi about whether you can count the neutral, let's say the unedible food as heter. So go on, Josie.
The Aflifi Gemara Dilan, Efshar Lamar Kain. The Laman the Amar Vishishim.
All right, wait, straight. Before you go on to the Laman the Amar, what does the words mean?
so he's saying, and even if so the Beit Yosef is trying to rationalize these two. It says, even according to our Gemara.
No, this is the Ran talking. I think this is the Ran talking. It's not the Beit Yosef.
The Ran, right. He's saying the Ran is trying to rationalize the two Gemaras. And it says is even according to the Gemara that we have in on Yoreh Nasha, right?
Dilan means our Gemara, which means the Bavli. Whenever we say Gemara Dilan, I think it means like ours is the Bavli. So even according to the Bavli, Efshar lo Marken, we can actually say that the Yerushalmi is right, and the Bavli agrees with the Yerushalmi. Just pointing out which way he's going. You could go when you have a machlokas, Bavli and Yerushalmi, you got to go one way or the other. And he's saying Gemara Dilan fits to the Yerushalmi. Go on.
Dilamanda Amar B'shishim Haynu Ta'ama. Dilo mitztarfin atzmot shivazroa leheter. Lefi shehen atzman asurin. Mipnei moach shivahem. So he's saying that the bones, is according to the person who says that that requires shishim, it's because of the taste, and we don't mix the bones with the Zroa B'Shela because they're entire things that are forbidden because of the marrow on the interior.
So what does the marrow mean? What does the marrow do?
The marrow exudes.
And therefore, right? What? And therefore what? And therefore?
And therefore it would contribute to the forbiddenness of the bone.
So the bones are different. Basically he's saying bones are different from klipa. So bones have marrow in them, so they're different from klipa. And because of their softness. Go ahead, keep reading.
Aval atzmot yeveshim uklipim she'enan nosrim efshar she'afotan shel isur ma'alin et heter. So, but for old bone, or sorry, but for dry bones or for shells that they themselves aren't forbidden, it's possible that you could count them.
Osrin is not asurin. Osrin means causing something else to become forbidden.
Right. So inam osrim, I'm sorry. Eshar she'afotan shel isur ma'alin et heter. So even though these, that a shell of an orla walnut, even though the walnut itself is forbidden, the shell can count against it because it doesn't really.
And also, which kinds of bones?
Dry bones.
And also dry bones. Ma'alin et heter. They contribute towards the heter.
Aval ein da'at ha-Ramban, but the Ramban doesn't think so.
Ein da'at ha-Ramban came.
Sorry. Ad kan lashono. So the Ran is basically saying here is a way of rationalizing it, and the Ramban disagrees.
And he's quoting the Ramban as saying he doesn't agree, and he's not going to want to go against the Ramban. I don't think so. So that whole idea, he's not, even though he suggested this idea, he's not going to really stick with it. And therefore what? And therefore, what would the halacha be if you had to say, what does the Ramban say? Put it this way. What does the Ramban say?
The Ramban would say that it wouldn't matter whether they're dry or fresh or whatever. The Isser goes with the Isser and the Heter goes with the Heter. We're back to where we started.
Oh. Or alternatively, that's one possibility. What's the other possibility? What is it? The Ramban doesn't think that you can make this distinction between dry and wet bones. That I agree with you. But which way? There's two ways it could be. But what does he think? He might paskin also like the Yerushalmi. That he might be makel like the Yerushalmi. Right? I would have thought that. It's not clear to me, but Max, what do you say?
I was going to say another possibility is that the stira between the Bavli and the Yerushalmi is still there, according to the Ramban.
Right. Oh, yeah, exactly. Yeah. I think according to the Ramban, the stira is still there. So now you have to ask the question. So how does the Ramban paskin like the Bavli or the Yerushalmi? And that's what and Josie said, well, he's obviously passing like the Bavli. And I'm saying it's not so clear to me. Maybe I thought he was passing like the Yerushalmi. It seemed to me by inference. Although I don't think you could pin it down one way or the other, really. Anybody have thoughts on that? All right. So we'll go on. So Josie, read on.
I didn't look up the reference to the Ramban, so I can't say one way or the other. I took a guess.
Okay, so go on.
Rabbi Nachum בפרק ה' במסכת תרומות, משנה ט', הביא דברי הירושלמי וכתב יש לחלק בין עצמות לקליפין, יש בעצמות לחוש יותר ממה שיש בקליפין. ואחרי כן כתב דלא מסתברא כלל, דהגיד אנשי למאן דאמר אין גידים ונותן טעם, אם ניפשל עם הירך מותר. So just going back to this for a second. So
read a little bit more. As long as you got this far, read a little bit more.
ומי עדיף עצמות יותר מגיד.
Migid.
Right. So Rabbeinu Shimshon is going to is going to quote this Mishnah in Trumot, and he says that there's reason to differ between shells of orla in this case and bones of meat in this case.
But in the end, he says the lo mastabra cloud.
So he doesn't agree with this rule.
In other words, he says that you could think to distinguish, but in the end, he decides not to distinguish. No difference.
Right.
And how does he? What's his proof that there's no difference? That bones are going to be just like. What does it mean? Bones are going to be just like the klipping.
Because they're not like the Gid Anasha, right?
Well, what does he learn from Gid Anasha? What is the din of Gid Anasha?
It has to be benoten tam.
Right? No. But that's not. That's the way we paskin. But there's two opinions about Giddim. One opinion about Giddim is that they give flavor, and one opinion is they don't give flavor. So he says Dahag Gidanashe Laman da Amar ein begidim de noten tam im nitbashel im ayerech mutar umi adifi atzamot yoter migid.
So would you think that bones are somehow more powerful at giving taste than the Gidanashe?
And that's a rhetorical question or a real question?
That's his rhetorical question.
And therefore implying what?
So
therefore, what's his opinion?
There's a kal v'chomer here. If you wouldn't count, if you would make this kind of calculation by Gid Anasha, where you could ignore I'm sorry, that there's no noten tam, the same would hold true for bones.
Right. And therefore, which way is he passing? Like the Bavli or Shalom? Or like the Mishnah and Truma? Which agrees. The Mishnah and Truma really agrees with the Yerushalmi.
Right. So he's paskening similar to the Mishnah and Truma and the Yerushalmi in this case.
Right. So Rabbeinu Shimshon basically is saying that the bones have no flavor. And you tell me how they do have flavor? And his answer is, they don't have more flavor than Giddim. Giddim, you can, you can boil up Giddim and make soup from it. It may not be very tasty, but it has more strong flavor. And in fact, if you eat hot dogs, then you're for sure eating some Giddim. That's how they make it 100% beef, or whatever it is. They put in everything. It's not just 100% beef; it's 100% of the beef. So you're eating Giddim, and They have flavor. So if there's even an opinion that says Tvidim don't have flavor, then certainly bones don't have flavor. Okay, so we're going against our Gemara, our nice, wonderful proof that we had. And go on.
Okay. Sorry.
Lakach nira.
Lakach nira dahad yalif mizro b'shela. U'misha'ar ba'atzamot simana be'alma.
Umisha'er. It's not umishar. It's not with an olive. It's with an ayin, so it means misha'er. And you
measure. You're measuring.
You measure exactly. Misha'er, not mishar. Umisha'er ba'atzamot, and you.
Simana be'alma.
What is simana ba'alma? How would you translate simana ba'alma?
It's sort of a generic stand-in or generic case.
No. There's another term an Aramaic term that we use a lot for when which is this is how do you say another way of saying that.
It's coming. It's in the next words.
Oh, so read yes. Who simana ba'almahu, and then read. It's just a mental. It's a mnemonic device. That's if you translate it. Simana ba'almahu. It's a mnemonic device. And then the next words.
What does
asmachta mean?
It's a something upon which you rely. It's something, but it's not a direct proof of something. It's a statement. Right. It's an illusion.
I would say it a little differently. I would say you rely on it. I would say here you don't rely on it. He's rejecting it. It's an asmachta. It means something that was pushed onto the pasuk, but it's not a limud. It was leaned onto the pasuk, but it's not actually what the pasuk is saying. It's like how would you say, like it was read into the pasuk as opposed to the pasuk read out from the pasuk. Who asmachta ba'alma hi kedamrinan bishmati.
Dimimimino midoraita beruba batil.
So what's his proof that it's an asmachta?
Because we understand actually that mimimino is actually midoraita berov.
Yeah, those are the words. And so explain.
So I'm a little bit lost in the weeds here.
Caleb, can you help her out?
That the requirement for 60 in this case is from the Yoreh Deah Siman, whereas the Torah would say that it's just the rov.
The Torah would say it's just rov, and therefore, what about the 60?
That's just a higher precaution from the rabbis.
Right. In other words, it can't be a real limud, because if it would be a real limud, then it would mean that min b'mino would require 60. Min b'mino would require 60, and we know that min b'mino is batal b'rov. You can't have a limud in the Torah that goes against the Torah. It's agreed upon by everybody that min b'mino is batal b'rov. So you can't all of a sudden tell me, oh, but I have a limud that says by min b'mino you need 60. It must therefore be an asmachta. It can't be a real limud. So that's his proof that it's not a real limud. Okay, Eitan, you want to read the next part for Katav Devarav?
Sure. V'katav Devarav Harosh beperek Yida Nashe v'ken pasak Harashba Zal v'Torat Habayitz de'atzmot shel Isur mitztarfim im haheter ve'in sarich lomar she'atzmot haheter mitztarfim im haheter u'mikol makom atzmot sheyesh bahem moach hamoach sheba'atzmot shel Isur oser u'mitztaref im ha'isur ad kan lashana. So this is what the Rosh wrote, and also the Rashba ruled this way in Torah Bayit, that the bones of Isur add together with the heter, and you don't even
when
need
it says when it says Katav Devarav, what does that mean? Katav Devarav Harosh. What is that? How would you translate that?
I'm not sure I'm not sure exactly. He interpreted, he wrote his own opinion on it.
No, it means he copied his words.
Oh,
Katav devarav harosh. In other words, the Rosh copied, he did cut and paste, we would say, of the words of Rabbeinu Shimshon. In other
oh,
words, he's ma'atik, you would say. He's a copy. Katav devarav. The Rosh copied those words of him, and therefore Viken Pasaka Rashba. So we're seeing that Rabbeinu Shimshon is being agreed to by the Rosh and the Rashba.
mm-hmm.
And then he just repeats. That's a motetzer, right?
The act of writing it down is a very strong agreement.
Umekom makom, and then he goes at the end, Mekom makom atzamot sheyesh behen moach, hamoach shebatzamot. But then he wrote that, but the moach itself is going to go with the Yisr. Ad kan l'shama. Here, keep reading. Really read the Bedek Abayit here.
Okay. Katav Rabbeinu Yerucham b'shem Harav Avraham ben Ismael mistavra dichi amrinan she'atzamot heter mitztarfin davka min b'mino Torah batel barov o min b'she'eno mino uvadaknuhu ve'eno noten taham bo aval min b'she'eno mino de'isura v'leka kfela afilu atzamot heter enan ma'alin Taha Yahiv Tama Ad Kan Lashono Ve'en Nireh Ken Midivrei Rabbeinu Shimshon Varosh. So
So this is
Rabbeinu,
this is the fourth opinion, actually. We'll see the third opinion. But so this is a weird opinion here, but it actually makes a lot of sense. What is his opinion?
he says that when we say that the bones of the heter add together, that's specifically when it's min b'mino, because then it can be batel barov.
In other words, midoraita min b'mino is batel barov. So when we're talking about a Rabbanan requirement to have 60, so you can join in other kind of dubious items like atzamota isser, but don't join in them when it's an isser deraita like min b'sheino mino. Min b'shemino, anyway, the 60 is only a rabbinic requirement, so we can let you bring in some dubious things like these atzamota isser. And then he brings another case.
Or it's min b'she'eno mino, and you've somehow checked and you can tell that it hasn't given off any flavor.
Right. And that if it hasn't given off any flavor, you're done. Why would you then need to start counting bones? What is he holding? What is he thinking about? Whose opinion?
Well, he's thinking about the kfela, I think, right?
Whose opinion that we saw in the Gemara is he thinking about? It's not in the Gemara, but it's in the commentaries on the Gemara. I know, Joel. I know you're reading my mind here. Jacob, what do you say?
Is it? I mean, I'm guessing it would be Rashi if it's commentary.
Yeah, it's Rashi. It's Rashi. What is Rashi? What's Rashi's? Let's call it Rashi's famous opinion.
I'm trying to remember exactly.
Anybody else remember what Rashi's opinion is?
But is it about Tam Ke Ikar?
No, how does Rashi explain 60? Rashi's whole explanation of 60 is different from the way we understand it. This we learned in the Gemara.
I need to remember.
I see you guys are not doing Chazara on your Gemara. Eitan, what do you say?
If I remember correctly, he says that it's all about taste, so that even if the ratio is less than 60, as long as you taste it and there's no isur flavor, then it's mutar.
No, that's exactly what he doesn't say. That's the standard opinion. That's exactly what he doesn't say.
Oh, okay.
Anybody else? Here, Max.
You need both shishim and kfela and tam.
Yeah, in other words, 60 is only when you already tasted it, then we still aren't going to let you eat it. You need 60. And so what this Rabbeinu Avraham Ismael says is, yeah, you know when you can count the bones of the Isser? When you're just trying to satisfy Rashi's Humra, that you need 60 even though there's no taste. Then you can, okay, there's no taste. Rashi has his famous chumrah that you need 60 even in such a case. So we'll let you count dubious things, either because of Rashi's chumrah or because it's the Rabbanan anyway, but not when it's actually matters. Then you can't count the bones of the Isser. And then the Bedek Habayis, which is the Beis Yosef, says, but that's not what Rabbi Shimshon said, and it's not what the Rosh said. Now I want to look, before we take the break, I just want to look at one more thing in the Darkei Moshe. Darkei Moshe, there was a little aleph, if you notice, towards the end of the Beit Yosef. And here he brings what I'll call the third opinion. Now, the first opinion, what are the first opinion? The first opinion was there's the camp of the Isser and the camp of the Heter. The second opinion is no, the bones count towards the Heter, even if the bones are Isser, except for the Moach. And the fourth opinion, or the third opinion that we've seen so far, but I'm going to call it the fourth opinion because it's fourth in order, because I skipped the Darkei Moshe. The opinion we just saw now is that you can only count the bones of Isser when you don't really need them anyway, because midoraita you have bit. And then we have the Darkei Moshe. So look at the Darkei Moshe Aleph. So the Aleph, if you notice a little Aleph on the end of the Beit Yosef, there towards the end, it says the Atzamot Isser. He says the Atzamot, the Beit Yosef, says the Atzamot shel Isser mitztarfim ima heter, and then there's an Aleph. And then look at here. Mashma, in the Darkei Moshe, he says like this: Mashma tesfirale tahachi naktina, that so we are paskening. V'ken b'hagaot sharidura. In other words, like the Rashba, Ta'atzamota Isser mitztarfim ima heter, and that's what it says in the Sharidura also. Katav b'shem no, sorry. V'ken b'hagaot sharidura katav b'shem amari kedivrei harosh, which was the Rosh. Remember, this is the opinion of the Rosh and the Rashba. Omnam, but now he's going to bring a dissenting view. Omnam be'isser v'heter klal kafchet katav b'shem or zarua kedat yesh omrim, like the yesh omrim, which is the first opinion, right? The yesh omrim is the way the tour started off by bringing the first opinion. He says yesh omrim shatzamos isser mitztarfim isser, and that's what heter mitztarfim heter. So the Or Zarua says like the yesh omrim v'katav klal lamed zayin tahachi naktinan levatla. That's how we do the bit. Gam b'haga'a acheret mishari dura siman mem katav divrei or zarua v'girsa acheret shesfir elei she'ein atzamot iser mitztarfim lo le'iser v'lo leheter. So this is what I call the third opinion. That they don't go either way. They don't go in the Isser and they don't go in the Heter. They're neutral. Atzamot, right? She'ein atzamot Isser. The it's Isser ones, mitzarfot lo'ima Isser, the lo'ima Heter. Omnam atzamot Heter mitzarfim leheter. But the atzamot of the mutter meat does join in with the mutter meat. V'katvu im shum adam yoreh ba'atzamot shel Isser mitzarfim leheter. If you would actually paskin that the atzamot Isser go towards the Heter, lo avar al divrei chacham. You didn't violate the rabbinic law. Aval ein lehakel kulehai, but you shouldn't paskin like that. Ad kan l'shoma. Okay, so you see there, that's like the third opinion. Well, first opinion was that that one camp versus the other camp. The second opinion we saw was that no, all the bones go with the heter. And the third opinion now is that the bones of the Isser are like neutral. They're not there. They're just like, you take them out of the picture. All right, let's take a break for 5 minutes. Maybe Shira, you want to read some, I want to go on, actually I want to read the Beit Yosef Gimel. I'm not going to be able to read everything that I assigned, but there was some interesting box there. But Beit Yosef Gimel, now what that Gimel is not in the tour, that's like his edition.
Great. Wait, Katav Harashba?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, okay, great. Okay, Katav Harashba, Shanish al Ladidan, Dinaktinan Karabenu Ephraim, Delo Amrinan Chaticha Atzman Aset Nevela, Ella Bibasar Bechalav Bilvad. Im Chaticha Habalua Me Isur, Mitzarefet Levatel Ha-Isur. So the Rashba records being asked, right, that, right, if we hold like Rabbeinu Ephraim that Hanan we don't hold Hanan for Shari Surim, right?
Exactly. That is how he holds. That's how the Rashba holds. And that's how the Ashkenazi poskim hold.
Right, so given that, right, then the question here, right, if the piece that absorbed Isur counts towards being batal the Isur. Ve'eshiv nirali shemitzarefet she'im haya afshar l'sochata hi atzma muteret v'hareze kekcha.
I correct myself. I said that backwards. I said that backwards. The Rashba holds like Rabbeinu Ephraim that there is no Hanan and Shari Surim like the Shulchan Aruch holds, not like the Ramah holds. I said it backwards. Sorry. So right, that we don't hold Hanan and Shari Surim. Then what's the question? What is the case? What's the case that? Can you describe the case?
I'm not sure exactly how this maps onto like bones potentially, but that if you have, right, a piece of meat that absorbed some amount of Isur from something else, if that piece sort of, right, if any of the volume of it can still count, right, when it's in another mixture, if that can help count towards your heter side of the equation or not.
Exactly. But what if we put numbers on it? Let's say I can put numbers on if you want, or you want to try. Go put numbers on.
I'll let you do the numbers.
Okay. Let's say one unit of, let's say, treif flavor or treif liquid is absorbed into a piece of meat that's size 10, or piece of something that's size 10, and then that falls into something of size 50. So if that piece that was size 10 is all usser because it didn't have enough to mavatel the piece that came into it. But now that 10 falls into 50, so that 10 should maybe usser the 50 because the 50 is only 5 times the size of the 10. It's not 60 times the size of the 10. But together the 50 and the 60 is 60 against the original one. So can we say that we have 60 now against the original one, even though the original one first went into a piece that was 10?
I think you should say something about Efshar L'Sochta, just so that we get full understanding. Since it's Efshar L'Sochta.
Well, here he says like this. He's saying a theoretical thing. It's not Efshar L'Sochta. The Rashba holds that you can never fully get the juice out of that original 10. But what he's saying, he's doing what's called a thought experiment here. He's saying, well, in his answer, that's really in his answer. Did we read the whole answer? Why don't you read the whole answer again?
Yeah. Okay. Is it right? Nirali shemit starafet she'im haya efshar l'sochta hi atzma muteret. Right, and so that, well, okay. Beharezek kechal she'amru kchal b'shishim ukchal min haminyan ukchal atzmo asur. Right. So he's saying that he thinks that piece, right, the sort of 10 units of that piece should be able to count towards your heter, because if we said that you could sort of like squeeze out that 1 unit of Isser that it absorbed, then that piece itself would be able to become mutar, right? If you were able to separate that out.
Right. If you were able to separate it, which you can't, but if theoretically you could separate it, then that piece would become mutar. So the piece is essential.
Because the piece itself is not intrinsically usher.
Exactly. The
As
10,
opposed to chaticha and nevela.
exactly. As opposed to chanan, chaticha
So I think
where the piece.
that Efsher l'sochta theoretically is not used elsewhere when we say Efsher l'sochta, but here it's used because it's not betzem chanan. It's not betzem chanan.
Right. It's not really chanan. And that, if you're asking why this is connected to the bones, because the whole reason that we counted the bones was not because of chanan either. The reason that we counted the bones was because, right, we counted the bones because they absorbed Isser, but not because of chanan. So now too, he's bringing another case of something that absorbs Isser, but it's not a bone, it's a piece of heter meat. And it absorbed Isser also. But the meat is Isser, but not because it's become intrinsically Isser. It's just Isser because we can't get the Isser out of it. But
Because it's
balua.
As if the chaticha itself, if we could have done it, it would be, because it doesn't need the squeezing out for itself to be mutter, because it's not intrinsically usher. It's just usher because there's a lot of balua there. That's all. Unfortunately for it. But it's actually.
So can somebody explain to me why this is like kahal?
Exactly.
Explain why this is like kahal. Maybe Reuven, can you figure out why this is like kahal? No, so
well, chal atzmo asur.
Right, chal atzmo asur.
So isn't that more like
how does that map onto our case? What's asur in our case?
The chaticha.
Right, the 10. The chaticha of size 10 is asur, just like the kachal is asur. Right. But what do we say about the kachal? What is the din on kachal?
You mean in terms of shishim or the calculation?
Yeah.
Yes, exactly.
No, there's a special din of kachal. Eitan, what's the special din of kachal?
You measure it against, you measure the whole kachal against 60 beyond it. And it's gzera that the kachal is asur.
But what does it mean, min haminyan? The kachal min haminyan.
Meaning you count it towards both the isur. I think you count it both towards the isur and the heter. So it has
exactly. You count it both towards the isur and the heter. And so that's sort of like our case, because the 10, even though it's usur, and you're never going to matter it, you're going to have to throw away that 10. But it's going to count towards towards the heter. Actually, it's a little bit different from the kachal, because the kachal counts towards the isser and the heter. And I think here, since you see, but in the kachal, we don't know how much isser is in there. So we have to count the whole kachal. But here, we do know how much isser is in it. We know in my case, I said 1 unit fell into 10 units. So we know it's originally only 1. So we'll only, so we don't have to count the full, let's say it's 11 now. We don't count the full 11 as Isser and the full 11 as Heter. We count 1 of the Isser as Isser and 10 of it as Heter. Yeah, Joel.
No, I think that if we didn't know, we just know this piece is Asur because it was Bolea something Asur, but the piece inherently isn't Asur. It would be just like the Kachal, right? Then we would just say,
exactly. So if in my case where I gave numbers to it, it was the way I said. But Joel is saying, but if we don't have numbers, if we just know that it absorbed Isser, then for all we know, it absorbed its full volume of Isser, and therefore it's fully Asur, and it's also fully Heter. So then if it would be 10, we would need, we'd need it again 60, we'd need 600, but we could count the 10 is part of this. We'd only need 590 because we get 600 out of the 10 and then the 10, right? Okay. Shira, can you read Dalit in the tour?
In the tour. Yeah. Okay, starting with Imisharinan.
Misharinan, yeah.
Okay. Imisharin haheter v'ha'isur kamo sheba lefanenu af al pi shehaya beheter yoter mitchila v'nitma'et b'bishulo v'nivla b'kedera. Right, so we measure both the heter and the isur sort of as they are, as we can see at this moment. Even though we know that with the heter, right, in this, like the meat, right, that it had a bigger volume at the beginning, and like got smaller as it cooked, and that got absorbed into the pot. Afilu hachi ein misharin oto ella kamo sheba lefanenu. Right, but even though we know this to be true, we still only measure it as it sort of looks now, post-cooking. Shagam b'isur haya yoter v'nitma eit v'nivla b'kedera. Right, because we know that also the isur also, like, cooked down while it, like got smaller as it cooked, right? And so if we know they both used to be bigger, but we know that they similarly probably like shrunk in the cooking process, so the ratio shouldn't be so different. Hilkach misharin shnehem kamo shebayin lefanenu. Right, so therefore we don't worry about knowing what it looked like, knowing what it was at an earlier stage in terms of volume.
Exactly. So for everybody except for Shira, where did we see this idea before? Shira wasn't here when we saw this. I'll give you a hint. It's the same answer to the question it's the same answer to the other question that I asked before. In other words, the answer is the same. The questions are different. Where did we see this before? Eitan.
I think there's the two Lishnas of Rabbi Chanina, and this is Rashi's perspective, adding sort of the third option.
Right, exactly. This is Rashi saying, after he explains the Gemara, he then says, after he explains the Gemara, I'm sorry, I was reading the note. Shira might know too. After he explains the Gemara, then Rashi says, but the way we actually do it is Kamosha Ba'al Lefaneinu. And he gives this exact rationale. So he's basically paraphrasing Rashi on Sadi Zayin, Amud Bet. Okay, continue, Shira, and Rash in Harashba.
Harashba katav yesh omrim she'omdin kama bala min haheter bikdera umitzaref im haheter. So the Rashba brings the opinion that you might try and sort of measure how much of the heter was absorbed into the pot and sort of add that to your heter side of the calculus, right, which is sort of like we could be more lenient and sort of count that absorbed heter in it, but seemingly not the isur.
Right, and not the isur, which maybe is kind of weird, but yeah, that's what the Rashba seems to say, right?
Be'erli min b'mino shemin haTorah batel berov v'chachamim hitzrichu shishim tolin lahakel. Right, and it seems like maybe why we're being so lenient in this case is that if it's min b'mino, which is deoraita batel berov, and we only need shishim derabanan, then we would default to being lenient.
Right. It's kind of like that same thing that we saw. Who said that we saw the same idea kind of before, but just today?
With the bones and the moach.
In Avraham Yismael, where he says like whenever we have 60 is only a derabanan, then we can like count all kinds of dubious things. So let's count also this thing in the wall there.
Yeah.
So that's what the Rashba is saying. Yoreh Deah, I think that's the Rashba talking. Yoreh Deah mean that as the Rashba said Yesh Omrim, right? The Rashba said Rashba katav yesh omri. He's not quoting himself. He's saying there are people who say that. And Yoreh Deah, he personally says, only rely on that in a case of min b'mina where shishim is anyway derabanan. Aval min b'she'ena mino. Go on.
Min b'she'ena mino, kazait b'chdei achilat pras devar Torah, ve'afilu ta'amo ke'ikaro, ein tolin bo lahakel, ve'ein masharin ela b'ma sheba lefanenu. Right, but min b'she'ena mino, which deoraita even does have a stricter standard, right? We don't go by rov, we go by I don't remember exactly, but kazait b'chdei achilat pras.
Well, kazai kedei that process when you would get, let's say, whipped. It would be an issur d'oraita, and you would get punished. And then he says, "Va'afilu tam ke'ikr." What he means by that is a whole machloket whether tam ke'ikr is d'oraita or d'rabanan, and he means, well, it's certainly so. Then it's like a suffix devar Torah. You know, tam ke'ikr maybe another requiring 60 and meinu mino might also be d'rabanan, but it might be d'oraita. And since it might be d'oraita, ein tolin bo lahakel. Don't be lenient.
Yeah. And so in that case, right, you can't do this trick with the measuring the heter and the walls.
Exactly.
V'adoni avi harosh zal lo chilik. And the Torah records that the Rosh did not disagree with this.
No, did not differentiate. Lo chilek. Lo chalak would be, he did not.
No. He did
Lo
not.
chilek means he didn't differentiate.
He didn't accept this as like a relevant distinction that in
and
either
therefore
case,
what?
just,
And therefore, how does he paskin? How does the Rosh paskin?
that you just measure what is before you, like
Exactly. L'chumra. In other words, he's not going to take this kula in any case. Very good. Is lo chilek l'chumra. In other words, he's not going to take this distinction that if it's d'Rabanan or d'Oraita, then you could be told that. No, he just rejects the Yesh Omri. Okay, let's go to the Shulchan Aruch and see how this all works out. We don't have much time, but we'll.
Rabbi Nachum,
Yeah.
Right, Rashi himself there, right, he says that we follow the opinion that we don't care what's balua in the walls because it's an Isur Deraita, right? And therefore, if it's a fake Deraita, we're going to be Machmir. If I remember correctly, right? Doesn't Rashi say that there?
Yeah, I hear what you're saying. You're saying that Rashi himself says, well, but he says that's his justification for going what's in front of you.
Yeah.
Because it's right. But I think there's also a practicality to it.
Yeah, well,
you're saying Rashi makes that distinction. You're saying, what would Rashi say if it would be min b'mino?
Yeah, but there's also a second sugya, isn't there, about like, right, what do I care about Bala Heter or Bala Isur, right? In other words, the walls also absorb Isur, so that would also, like you can't make that calculation. So I think the Rosh and the Tur would fall on the side of, well, the other sugya seems to say you got to measure what's in front of you because you can't rely on what's on the walls at the end of the day.
All right, let's look. Since we just read Dalet, let's look at Dalet in the Shulchan first. So, Lexi, you want to read Dalet first?
In the Shulchan Aruch?
Yeah.
Yeah. משערים ברוטב בכיפה, פירוש הדקדק של בשר ותבלין המתאסף בשולי קדירה, ובחתיכות ומשערים ההתר והאיסור כמו שבא לפנינו, אף על פי שהיה בהתר יותר מתחילה ונתמעט בשולו ונבלע בקדירה. So again, we measure with the sauce and the schmutz and all of the things that are the stuff inside of the pot and the pieces. We measure the Isser and Heter as they appear before us now. Even if, again, there initially was more to the Heter and it has, cooked down. And some of that's been absorbed in the pot. Aval, im hu min b'mino, misharin gam b'ma shebala hakdera, ועומד בדפני הקדירה, ומשערים זה בעומד יפה, ורואים אותו כאילו הוא בעין. אבל מה שקלה ועבד מחמת האור, אינו מצטרף שזה קלה לגמרי. So in a case of Mino, again, going off what we saw in the Rashba, where we can be more lenient, in that scenario, we do measure that which we assume is absorbed within the pot walls with a sort of generous estimate.
Mhm.
That can also combine to help Mvatal the Isser. But that's in a case where it's presumably this has to be like a pretty, because it's not totally clear how you're supposed to know exactly which percentage has been absorbed versus what has been burned off.
Well, no,
But
I think
the notion is how liquidy it is. I think
no,
it's
but you
that.
know, if the pot went down by a lot, notice if you know the pot was full to the top and now it's halfway, you can't necessarily take all that. You can just say, well, how much could it possibly fit in the walls? That's what he's saying. You don't get to measure everything that evaporated. You just get to measure what you think could have possibly gone into the walls.
Well, obviously, we're also dealing with some like not necessarily so bedafka understandings of how evaporation and flavor work. So that's another complicating factor. But in any case, that certainly if you're doing like dry cooking, right, where there seems to be much more of an assumption that things are like being cooked off by the fire, but some notion that basically like there's some things we think vanish, so we're not in the pot, that we think it's just like it's been evaporated and it's gone. You can't count that. But whatever reasonable amount you think could have been absorbed by the pots of the walls of the pot, in Min Bimino, you can count that towards the heter.
Right. So does this surprise you how he paskins? How did he paskin?
I mean, Paskin like the Rashba and the Roche, like that's not surprising.
Wait, the Roche?
Or no, wait,
No,
what was
he did
the
not paskin like the Roche.
sorry, not like the Roche. But the fact that he Paskins like the Rashba, I feel like is not shocking.
Right. It's funny. He paskins like the Rashba. He did not paskin like the Roche. Paskin like the Rashba, which is a leniency. Now, by the way, you know, there's this famous thing that the everyone knows the Shlosha Amudei Hora'ah.
Right, but it gets a lot. He's also loved, like it's usually true. It's not always true. And also
Exactly. I was
especially
trying to think about what could be a rule. When does he, what did he mean by that if he's not
I
going
also
to
think
actually
that he's
follow it?
most
And I
often
think the
much
rule might be that, like, when it's a derabanan, he can paskin how he wants, maybe something
well,
like that.
I think there's a couple other things. I think one is that anecdotally, I think that he is more willing to rule against the Rosh than the Rambam and the Rif. That like even when we're dealing with, I mean, obviously it's often the case that you also have the Rambam and the Rif against the Rosh because they're usually paired together. But that even when you don't have the others, like in this case, I feel like he is more willing to rule against the Rosh than like explicitly rule against a Rambam. But also, I think he's more willing to rule against what people have reported to be the opinion of one of them than what we see explicitly in their own material is another thing, right? That like the difference between the Torah saying something is the Rosh's opinion versus this is like explicitly unambiguously in the Rosh, or again, what people assume to be the Rambam's opinion or the Rif's opinion from what they've included or from absences, as opposed to like their very explicit, unambiguous psak. I feel like he's more willing to rule against the things that are not written
Okay.
explicitly
All
by
right, but let me just summarize that the point is that he is saying the halacha is like the Rashba, that he's being lenient, and not like you might have thought he would have said like the Rosh, which is the way it sounded from the tour. Let's look at the what shach did I want to say? Wait, I think Taz.
Is the Taz about what about the what if there was a lot of Isur and it went down a lot in size? That one, right?
I want to do Taz Dalid. Is that the right one? Let's look at Taz Dalid. So we said Misharin berotev ubekipa ukamosha ba'lefanenu afapi shaya yoter. Right. So look at Dalid. Who maybe Max? You want to read?
Sure. Harashba v'chidushav v'haran kasvu di'im ra'inu ha'isr b'shas nefilaso v'lo nisma'it b'shir echad ima heter b'sha'arin ha'heter shenivla b'ktera u'mitztarfin aso l'mash b'soch ha'kedera u'misha'arinan ha'isr kishas nefilaso l'heter. Okay, so the Rashba and the Ran hold that if you witness the Isser falling in, and it doesn't get any smaller or dissolve, then you can measure.
No, it didn't go down at the same rate as the Isser. They went down at different rates. It didn't go down at the same rate as the heter.
Okay, then you can measure the heter that has been absorbed into the walls, and then like combine that with what's in the kedera, and then do your calculation, your calculation of how big as the size that it was when it fell in.
In other words, you have this one. He says like this: you can count what's in the walls of the pot, but only if you take the worst case scenario of. In other words, you know the maximum value of the Isser. The Isser came in as 1 unit, or 1 liter, or 1 kilo, and it shrank. But so you measure it against a whole liter, and then you could. But then once you're saying I'm going to take the maximum value of the Isser, then I'm allowed to add in the walls, which is a little bit different from what we said. We go on. V'katav Rashal.
The Katav Maharshal, I think this is Parakita Nasha Siman Lamedalid Lahachmir Afilu Berainu Ki Ein Lamod Al Shoresh Adavar Velo Yada Kalam Balal Hakdera Ela Laolam Misha'arin Kamosha Balafaninu. Right, that we just don't know enough about how to calculate what's been absorbed into the walls. It's just totally balafaninu without any attention paid to what it was. And so when the Shulchan Aruch says Misha'arin Omed Yafeh, we don't listen to that.
Right. So this is a very important. Someone's written Rashal, Marshal. It's the same person. Very important Rashal, and the Taz is telling us ignore this sif, which is very important. I always say you can't pass from the Gemara, and that's famous. You can't pass from the Gemara, and the addendum to that is you also can't pass from the Shulchan Aruch. You have to read what everybody says. So the Taz is saying, no, you basically saying paskin like the Rosh, not like the Rashba. Even though, and the Rashba seems to, at least this quotation seems to be less lenient than we thought. Here, there's another look at Hey now in Taz.
Keep going.
Yeah, the next Taz.
Yeah. V'hani milei min b'she'eno mino shebezeh tzarich shishi min haTorah kivan denosin dam. Al kain ein l'sha'er habalua.
Okay. In other words, he's just explaining the shul, even though he's already said we're not going to really paskin like this. He's explaining though why was he being machmir by min b'she'eno mino, that it's min Torah, and therefore you can't count what's balua. The ein lakshot.
Amai anu matirin b'yesh achshav shishim lefaninu shema be'es nefilas ha'isr hayah ha'isr gadol me'od v'nitztamek mimenu harbeh mima shenitztamek haheter de'achzuke isora lo machzikinan kevan she'achshav ein reusa.
This is very important. Very, very important Taz here. Read it. Let me read it. Read it again. The ein lakshot.
The V'yesh shishim.
Read it again from Ve'en Lakshot.
Ve'en Lakshot. Amai anu matirin b'yesh achshav shishim lefanenu. So don't bring me this question of why are we permitting I guess what in a case where you have shishim sitting in front of you.
Even if you have 60 in front of him, I can think of a case. I can say maybe it was the Isser was much bigger and it shrank a lot, and the heter didn't shrink so much.
And the head not at the same rate.
Right. And therefore it should be all Isser. So what gives me the right to just say I'll judge what I see in front of me?
Mm-hmm.
Shema be'ed nefilat ha'Isser hayah ha'Isser gadol ma'od It reduced more than the heter.
Meaning that you think the ratio is 60, but it's not actually 60.
Right. It was originally not 60, so it became usher in the beginning.
Right.
So and now he gives this very important klal. This is his answer.
No,
No, de achazuke, you got to read those words. So that's the part I underlined the next 4 words.
De achzuke isora lo machzikinan.
Yeah.
That we just don't have the chazaka that something is worse than it is right now.
No, not exactly. Good try, but somebody else want to give it a try?
Strengthen, not chazaka, strengthen.
No, it's the same word, yeah, but
it's different.
What's he trying to say? Azuke isura lo machzikina.
We don't strengthen the isser any more than it is when it comes in front of us. We don't
Yeah,
make
kind
it.
of.
We don't
Yeah,
make
that's
it bigger.
kind of
we don't make it
that's a
worse.
kind of good translation, but we can get more colloquial, maybe.
Yeah.
I think actually presumption was probably maybe even more of like we just don't establish something within the presumption of isser. Like we default if we don't have a reason in front of us.
Right.
We think it's something's isser. We're
right.
not going to default to the like default status or presumption of it being usser.
Right.
If what is before
We
of
don't
us.
create. I would say it like this: we don't create isurim out of thin air. Unless you have some kind of proof that there's something happened that was usser, we don't machzik an isser. We don't establish an isser where we have no reason to establish the isser. We don't just start creating isurim because maybe, because there's no end of ourselves. There's no end to that. Maybe there were bugs in this rice, so I can't eat it now. Maybe I don't see them now. Maybe there were bugs there.
If I can just interrupt for a second, two quick points. Exactly correct. And to distinguish between when it's a case of ein machzikin isura, and when you say, well, it's a chumrah, it may be a false chumrah. Would that be correct, Nachum?
Yeah, you can't just make up a chumrah when you
I'm
have
saying
no.
there's like false chumras.
Yeah, there's such a thing as a false. You can't just start second guessing every reality that comes before you.
Right. I just want to comment on the Rishal speaker as Nachum says, you have to know everything. I would say it this way. When people say, why are you learning that Shulchan Aruch? It's such a rigid book. What you say to them is, you don't know. It's a subversive text. That's what you got to say back. Speak their language. Okay, I'm sorry. Go
on. So we read a little bit more, maybe. Just read a few more words, maybe.
Yeah. Okay.
So we don't create a isser out of thin air. Kevan.
Shachshav ein riusa v'yeshishim, because there's no. We do have shishim, and we don't have anything worse than that.
Yeah, this is an important concept to know also. I mean, first of all, the Taz is not inventing the term isur lo machzikina. It's a concept. And this is also a concept, riusa. Riusa means there's no, I'm going to translate another Hebrew word, hisaron. There's nothing missing. There's no lack. There's no lacuna here, to use the Latin word. There's no lacuna here. There's nothing that is missing here to indicate that there wasn't 60 before. In other words, there's no lacuna here. There's no reason to suspect anything. V'yeshishim, and there is 60. Okay. And he brings a similar example. Let's go back to the beginning of the Shulchan Aruch. Here, Joel, you want to read the beginning here? I don't think you have to translate. I think you can just read it to us.
Sure.
We should all know this by now.
All right. You want to read the title too? I have no clue. Those are original to the Chaver, but I'll read it.
Whatever you want.
Saritet, din hatzamot imitztarfin levatel isor v'shelo levatel isor lechatchila uvo shivat seifim. Okay. Chatichat nevila sheyesh ba basar v'atzamot shenafla liktera heter. Atzamot ha'isor mitztarfim ima heter levatel isor. Ve'ein tzarich lomar she'atzamot haheter mitztarfim im haheter. All right. So, like we saw, the opinion is it's Rabbi Shimshon and other people that the atzamot of the Isur, and of course even more so. I'm not supposed to translate. I'm going to keep going. Never
No,
mind.
no, you're allowed to. Don't translate, but you're allowed to say.
Oh, yeah.
What's he?
So
Who is he poskening like?
He's poskening like Rabbi Shimshon, and was also the Ron also bring a version of this, I think. But that atzamot haheter are fine. Not haheter, atzamot isur are part of the calculus for the good side, not for the bad side. That's the
Right. In other words, I think it was the first. No, not the first opinion. It was the second opinion. The first opinion was that the camp of the Isser and the camp of the Heter. This is the second opinion, right? That the Atzamot Isser mitzarfim ima Heter.
Yeah, I would say maybe put it. He's poskening like the Yerushalmi with the klipot and applying it to the atzamot. Let's put it.
Right. He's poskening like the Yerushalmi, and right, like who is it? Who said that?
It was the Rosh Mishans who I think in his Perush on the Mishnah there says that it applies here as well, right? Did I not get that right? I think so, but he says aval hamoach, right? Shabbat samot isur mistarefim isur, but the moach, we saw this also, right? In kind of the chiluk there, the marrow does count as isur. V'guf hakdera ina mitzarefet loima isur v'loima heter, and the pot itself does not count, is neutral. Let's put it that way. So, which is one of the opinions we saw about the bones, but not how we're going to go. All right.
Right. The pot will be neutral.
Yeah.
Okay.
V'yesh machmirim sheletzaref atzamot isur ima heter levatel. So the Ramah seems to posit, like we saw this opinion in the Darchei Moshe, that some people are, he says, stringent, but it's to make them neutral, essentially. You make the bones neutral in this case. Uvmakom have said, yesh lismoch hamakilim umatirin ki ken ikar. He says, but in a place where there's loss, we can rely on essentially the Shulchan Aruch's opinion, count the atzamot of the Isur towards the heter, and because that's really the ikar hadin.
Right. So in other words, he's reminding us that maybe they should be neutral, but nobody is saying that they should join the Isser, by the way.
Yeah.
All right, and bet.
All right. B'midrim amarim she'atzamot Isur mitztarfim heter. So what case are we talking about where we have this leniency? That's all when it falls in raw. Aval imit bashlat chila ve'achar kach nafla lekderat heter atzamot sheba mitztarfim im isur lefi shebal'u mibasar nevela keshinit bashla levada. He's literally, by the way, copying the language of the Torah here.
Right. And why doesn't the Ramah say, but I don't hold Chanan? I hold Chanan, and therefore does the Atzamot even therefore wait a second. Atzamot sheba shemitzarfim ima iser lefi shebalu mibasar ken. And again, how could he say this? How could the Shulchan Aruch say this when he doesn't hold Chanan? And the answer is because this is not a case of Chanan, it's just a case of balua, of like balua being absorbed into the bones.
Yeah, some people say because he agrees that bones, like if you made bone china, it would be kasherable. Look, bone china is weird because they glaze it, but if you made a plate out of bone, it's kasherable, and we don't say about metal that it's Hanan. The Ramah says that specifically. He says about metal we don't say Hanan, so we also don't say Hanan about bones. At the end of the day,
right? Well, we didn't learn that today, but yeah, that's the whole topic, right?
Well, you asked me the question, so I figured.
In other words, the whole topic that we didn't really discuss is that maybe there's Hanan in clay. And why isn't there Hanan? Why isn't there Hanan in the bones? And the answer is because you can do Hagala on bones. Yeah. And unlike clay, which you can't do Hagala. All right, now read Gimel.
All right. Bishar Isurim chutz mi basar b'chalav. Chaticha de blua hablua. Is it hablua mi isur? Mitzrefet levatel isur. This is exactly what we saw before. This is, I don't hold Hanan. We saw this from the Rashba, right? The Beit Yosef quoted the Rashba there. Don't hold Chanan b'shar Yisurim. And the Haggah says, "Ve'eno agin ken ki kaimalan b'chol Yisurim chatichan asen nevela kide el siman tzadibet." He says, no, we hold that in all Isurim, Hanan applies. Tov.
Right. We're sort of done here, but there is this. I want to just look at this one dot. Can you read quickly this dalid in the shach? It's kind of a complicated one. If you have a few minutes, whoever has a few minutes can stay.
It's on. Oh, okay. About Hanan B'shar Yisurim Chutz B'Basar B'Chalav, right? That we say.
It says B'shar. Gimel. It said again B'shar Yisurim Chutz B'Basar B'Chalav, which is our case. B'shar Yisurim Chaticha Habalua Me'Isser Mitzaref itself joins the Vatel the Isser, like Kachal. By the way, the Rambam said that Kachal is a special din because it's the Rabbanan.
Yeah.
And therefore maybe he wouldn't say this, but fine. So look at Dalit.
All right. Perush. Hachaticha balua misur shenafla leheter ve'ein beter shishim levatel isur. So we don't have a 60-to-1 ratio. This chaticha has absorbed isur. It's fallen into this heter. Ela bitzir. Well, it only rather gets to 60 bitzirufa chaticha mitzdarfin. If you add the chaticha in as part of the heter, then it.
Let me read it.
Oh,
okay. I'm getting confused. So maybe just at least let me read it again. Perush. Haticha habalua me'isser shenafla leheter ve'ein beheter shishim levatel et ha'isser ela b'tziruf ha'chaticha. You have to join the actual haticha itself in order to create the heter. Mitztarfin gam ha'chaticha levatla. In other words, the chaticha can join to mavatel itself. It itself to mavatel atzma. I'm adding the word mitztaref gam hachaticha levatel atzmo or atzma. He can mevatel it itself. Mihu hachaticha atzma asura. But don't think that the chaticha now is mutter. Lefisha isser sheba einu niflat mimenu legamre. The isser never fully leaves it. So don't think that you can now eat that piece. Kamosha Katava Rashba. The Rashba says that you can never get it out. V'amechaber. So there you go. So basically he's saying, don't make the mistake and think that because you can join the piece to create the heter, that piece itself is usher. Just like the kachal. The kachal is usher, even though it joins with the heter to create the heter, to create the bittul. The piece remains asur.
If it were nimoach, though, then it wouldn't, right?
If it'd be moach,
nimoach. If it were melted into the if it's no longer makiro, right?
if it's like if you're saying if it's like lach balach or something.
Yeah, if it became lach balach, right? In the end, it's
yeah, that's a different case. Fine.
Yeah,
that's a different case. Okay, Shukayach. Next time we'll do hey to the end. I think mostly focusing on hay. So hay is a very important and complicated siman. Sif. Okay. I'll send out some sources on that tomorrow or the next day. Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah.